So like you compare that to today, like I think it's something like 70% of leaders don't think that they're equipped to be leaders, like just any level of leadership.
Welcome to a new wave of entrepreneurship by Venture for Canada. Venture for Canada is a national charity on a mission to foster the entrepreneurial skills and mindsets of young Canadians. Our vision is a Canada where young people can equitably realize their entrepreneurial potential to help build one of the most prosperous entrepreneurial ecosystems in the world.
Today I have Susy Martins in the house. Susy is an international business executive and executive coach. She's worked with and led teams in over 20 countries across North America, Europe, South America, and Asia. As an experienced chief people officer and operations exec, Susy has experience in both rapidly scaling and right-sizing organizations, coaching at all levels of leadership, and hands-on leadership and experience across multiple functional areas. From a business perspective, Susy has spearheaded multiple transformation and automation projects and managed multi-million-dollar budgets and thousands of employees for tech unicorns like Clearco and Applyboard, for global industry businesses like General Electric and 3M, and global financial services like Manulife. Very excited to dive in with Susy. Hi, Susy. Welcome to a new wave of entrepreneurship. It's so good to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Gina.
Yeah, the pleasure is mine. So you have an incredible career, a really diverse career, and I want to jump into some of the nuance of that with you. And I kind of want to start with the question of how did you choose what you were going to do at each stage?
Yeah. So in terms of deciding like how to move through my career, I get asked this a lot because I moved, different functional areas. I've moved different geographies, different disciplines. And the reality is I didn't have a master plan. That's never been me. Like I've never been a pure play, like functional expert, like, finance person that, like my husband that like wasn't finance intern, then all the way up to like, kind of your CFO, like very pure play. And for me, I always was very curious and wanted to learn lots of different things. So for each job, when I made a decision of what I'd like to do, I just had one criteria or two for my next job. So I think the underlying like the underpinning thing of all of it that I've realized by reflecting back is that I always chose the organizations based on alignment, like to me, like, high integrity organizations. I can say that all day long. Every org I've worked with is a very high integrity org, and, that I thought that it was like the top of its game in a different way and why I wanted to join it. So that was part of my choice, like aligning to a company that I aligned to personally. Right. And then besides that, like I always had some sort of criteria, like my first job, um, I, graduated business school. A lot of my like colleagues, they are all becoming investment bankers. And I decided to go into customer service. They thought I'd lost my mind. And, and I was like, well, I, just went to like business school and I thought I really want to work at an innovative company. And that was 3M. And 3M was like the epitome of innovation when I graduated. And, customer service where you started. And I was able to work in French, which I always also wanted to work in a second language because I'd studied French and Spanish. So that led me to 3M. And and so on and so forth throughout my career, like when I made those transitions. And when then I went to GE, and worked most of my 20s, in Europe. And that happened because I really wanted to gain my stripes in business. So one of my criteria then was like I really should learn finance on my next job, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted to go abroad. So I was, lucky. I'd made friends like on student exchange, all of that great stuff, and kind of everything lined up to make that happen. But that was my idea. Like it was never some super complex plan, right? And it's hard when you
Mm-hmm.
switch a lot like this, you're constantly reinventing yourself. Like it all seems really cool, to switch and do new things. But each time you're like starting from zero almost about, showing people who you are, how you work, learning a new thing, right? So you have to really be
Mm-hmm.
brave a bit and like not ashamed of just telling people you don't know, because most of the time you don't know what you're doing, right? Like as you're starting, because everything's so new. So
Yes.
anyways, I feel like that's been a trend throughout my whole career, is that that curiosity and openness to just explore new things and admit when I need help, and seek that out.
Speaking to your experience working globally, and I think leading teams across 20 plus countries, what kind of cultural insights have you gained that early stage founders would want to consider when expanding globally?
Yeah. I think right now it's interesting, right? Because the world is smaller. It used to be, especially pre-COVID, we all know this, right? That it kind of, we were all working more so like locally. You could be part of like a bigger company. Very few companies were completely globally because it was so complicated, right? And all the paperwork and everything that was involved in doing that. Since then, things, like companies like Deal, like DEEL, like they help, like you hire someone abroad when you want to hire someone locally. And it does, makes that whole process easier, for example. So a lot of that type of support exists. So I
Mhm.
see people opening their minds and saying like, oh, whatever, like we'll hire someone like in Eastern Europe and someone in Asia and someone in Latin America and build a team. And what I will tell you is that one thing that hasn't changed is that being global is completely complex, right? Like if you do something, in person, and right now, of course, like we can talk about this too, like in terms of like the hybrid world we're in, but like in person
Mhm.
management's a bit hard. If you're a first time leader and you're doing it in person, there's so much to learn about communication, how to drive a team, how to keep people aligned, all the dynamics, etc. So then the complexity keeps on increasing as you go hybrid. Then you need to be more intentional, more written, right? Like more, planned, more clear rituals in your
Mhm.
team. All of those things need to be much more deliberate. And when you go global, the complexity is that next notch higher. Now you have time zones. Now you have different ways of working globally, of different things that are accepted and not accepted, different management styles, different communication, like ways of communicating across the team. So I would say, like, yeah, if you're a founder thinking, oh yeah, like let's just do this globally, like maybe just pilot something, do one little piece
Mhm.
because it's complex, right? Like everything about it's complex. The legalities, the setup, the ways you work, communication. So just figure out those norms, in bite size, if you want to do it, but
Mhm.
try and be local. Like obviously, like championing Canada, but also, there's something to that hustle to innovation of figuring that out in person and reading people's cues and working together.
Mhm.
Then you can even ask better questions and stuff when you're remote to be like, what should I be looking for? What happened in person that's not happening now? Right now that I'm remote.
Mm.
So
Yeah. Okay. There's two questions I want to ask you out of that. The first
yeah.
one is about process, and the second one is about asking questions. So, one of the things that I like to do and have done in my career a couple of times is help organizations scale from very small to kind of mid-sized. And so, all of that is about implementing processes. And I also love the innovation stage where it is sort of pre process often, right? And you're trying to, especially if you're trying to prototype something. I just wanted to ask you about this idea of when does a founder know that it's time to start implementing processes? I think we often hear and feel this sort of allergy to process, this fear of process that it's going to bog us down, it's going to slow us down. Yes, which it does. But
Yeah.
at the same time, there's sort of these tipping points at which you start to feel, or I start to feel the need for a new process. But I want to just ask you, how would you sort of answer that question? Or I'm sure you've coached or trained or supported teams where you realize it's because there's processes that are missing here.
Oh
So yeah, talk to us a bit about that for founders or young companies.
yeah, 100%. Process is a fun discussion, right? It just doesn't sound like it would be fun. But like the whole idea of process, there is an allergic reaction. Like you throw the word out process in any kind of scale up or startup, they're like, oh, process. Like this is so heavy. Like we're not a corporate organization. Like why are we bringing this in? Like we don't need this. Like I don't want to have any processes here. Like I've heard that more times than I could count, right? And what does that even mean? I don't know if there's a book out there or some sort of thing that happens in the background when people are becoming founders or thinking about it or in that innovation space where they're just like process is evil, like you avoid at all costs. Like I actually think, this is a major misconception. Process is good, you know what I mean? But it's right sizing it, right? You don't, like if you look at I've worked in like huge like multinationals that have been around for over 100 years, like the 3Ms, Manulife and John Hancock, the Allianz, these types of companies, GE, they've had hundreds of acquisitions and hundreds of years of things, and they're crossed different borders. There, some of them in capital markets. Like there is a big need for process, and it's hard to unwind
Mhm.
it if you've ever tried to do it. Like it's so hard because they're there for a certain reason, and and there's an opportunity to optimize all of that. But it is very much like grown into that. When you're on the startup side, you're starting from zero, which is awesome. That's a big advantage. That's why startups are great and disrupt and come in and blow other things out of the water because they don't have baggage, right? But that doesn't mean you don't need any process. Like you don't need this over complicated thing that happened over so many years that's so hard to unwind, so expensive to unwind. From a systems perspective and process, people perspective in big
Mhm.
companies. The smaller company, maybe you just need simple process. Maybe it's just two steps. I think that's the way to think about it. And like maybe use different words if you're working in a startup or scale up and you're trying to get something across and you're trying to like put a process in place. You could just put like, here's a couple guardrails. Why don't we just say like everybody has, these two steps?
Mhm.
It makes it more feasible, more tangible for the
Mhm.
people listening to it. So when you want to talk about a process, like talk about it in different words, I guess is one piece of advice. And then two, when you do get to a stage where you're doing like transformation or managing big initiatives like huge system implementation, like you can't
Mhm.
like wish a system implementation in place or have someone go, hey, I've never done it, happy to do it, and expect it to come out as well as it would if there was like an organized way about going about it. So founders can think about like, hey, actually, I've never done this thing before. The complexity is high. Bring in someone who can bring process for maybe just that project. So
Mhm.
putting in
Yeah.
like a finance system, even an HR system, like bring in someone who's done it before, who already knows, they followed the steps. Make sure you do it right the first time so you're not constantly revisiting or constantly having disconnects on how things are done. So
Mhm.
those are some thoughts on process. But yeah, like obviously, like I've been a project manager in my past. I've been an auditor, so a lot of these things, like I do like
Mhm.
process. I've seen good and bad in process, and I get you can over engineer it, but I do think we've indexed way too far on the innovation side of just kind of hating process.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the other thing I would add is talking to your team about it too, because often I find if they're the ones who are going to have to work within the process, they often have a lot to say about it. Now, you can't ask them, do you want this process or not? Actually, I think you might have given me this advice once upon a time, but it was about you ask them, what is it going to take for this process to make sense? Or what's going to feel too heavy, too light? When do we implement this or how do we implement this? I think those types of questions with your team can be, for me, incredibly helpful, where I can't see everything that they're doing. So it's not as clear to me how it's going to impact their day to day. And I think when I've not done that, it's gone less well than when I've done
Yeah, that's a really good call out. It's true. You have to involve people. Yeah. And maybe that's why it gets a bad rap, because maybe sometimes people just come in blindly and say you need to follow these 5 steps, right?
that. Yeah.
Versus taking into account there is a quiet process that's
Yeah.
already
And
in
it's
place.
hard because I don't like doing it. I don't like forcing people into a lane. It's not my natural way of being. My natural state of being is very innovation, creativity. And so having to force people into these lanes is a little bit painful for me. And yet I can see the benefit of it, which might be actually good. You know how you kind of usually have process people and innovation people, or that's how we often think of it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's good to have on a leadership team, you definitely having both, so that making sure you have both represented so that you can have both those voices either in the same person or at the same table. Because if you love process, people can tend to want to keep implementing them and kind of want to keep growing them. I see that often because that's what they're good at, and they can see the benefits of it just in terms of the process. But you need the people at the table who can also see the drawbacks in terms of the people, the way the actual humans were working together. I think. Does that make sense?
100%. And that's like, yeah, that's a good way to build out your team. You need someone who's like a driver, like a CEO that just makes decisions, can see what they want to get done and get it done, right? You need that type of person on team. You also need an ideator and someone who brings momentum, like let's do this, let's do that. Like this could be cool. Someone who can dream bigger, along with that kind of, driver person. And then you need the details people, like, the people who are
Mhm.
going to be process oriented and think about like, wait a minute. Yeah, I know this sounds great and you guys want to get this done, but like, don't forget these 4 things, right? And then, and then you need
Mhm.
humanizers to bring together kind of all those types of personalities. But it's a good
Yeah,
call out, right? Because as you're leading and starting companies, to think about who are the right people on the team, right? You can't just
yeah,
have everyone be the same, right? Like it
yeah.
won't
Who
be
thinks differently from me and bring that person closer to you. That's what I do. The people who are introverts, people who are process and detail oriented, I need close to me. And we often have a tricky relationship. And this actually, we might adore each other, but there's often lots of conflict in our conversations, and healthy conflict, in my
that's
opinion.
great.
And this kind of leads me to another question based on your earlier answer, Susie, which is sort of when people are facing either they're working under different styles of leadership or they're working in amongst different cultures, and that could be cultures within cultures. Um, what are kind of the hacks? What should people be aware of to be able to be their most productive, successful, kind of healthy healthiest versions of themselves? How do you work within very different or changing environments?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and it is happening a lot right now, right? Like, I think three
Mm,
quarters of tech companies have laid off this year.
mm,
Like, that's a lot, right? So that means a lot of change, right? Like new leaders, new companies for people, switching up how things are done. I think, in the work that I'm doing now, what I see is like what you should try to avoid is making assumptions, right? So a lot of times, like leaders will not be aligned with their teams, being like, "Why is this person not doing this? Like, I don't understand." You talk to that person, they're just like, "I didn't know I was supposed to do that," right? And they're
mm,
meeting and talking about their deliverables all the time, which seems weird, right? So I hear this scenario all the time. I think the key here is to like be very clear on the questions that you're asking, because I think there's so much nuance in speaking that the person may be speaking a certain way, as your leader saying like, hey, like these top three things are the priority, right? And then you may come back and say like, you know what, like I'm working on two, three, and then four and five, and they're like, oh good, but they didn't say, oh, you know what, one I'm seeing as a major gap, right? So they're silently frustrated about this and not saying that. I'm not asking because they just told me good. So I think the good way to focus on this is just to like, as a person owning your own area, is just to be very clear. Be like, hey, that was it for today. Like anything that I'm missing or anything, you think we should talk about or any feedback on your side. And then the other way, like leave an option for feedback on both sides. So that's what I'm
mhm,
encouraging now for one-on-ones is like, always talk about one, how you're feeling and ask others how they're doing to see where they're at in terms of just work. Two, update on like the top three things they're working on or just finished working on, the top three they're going to work on, any help they need with those. So kind of like an execution discussion. Then the last one's feedback. So if you make that part of your one-on-one templates, the feedback piece, it's good to have in there because then it just gives an option to kind of keep on having that open discussion so that you don't get out of whack and out of understanding with someone that is far away. Maybe,
yeah.
interprets things different than you. Could be a different culture. All of those things just pile on complexity, right? So the more you create the opportunities and more you ask good questions, the more aligned you'll be. But don't be afraid. Ask.
So, what makes a good question
Like, what
from
would
a
be a
bad
good
question?
question? Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I think I'd always ask, like, I think we're 100% aligned. Like, are you? I would ask someone, like, say, like, we were working together. I would be like, okay, Gina. I was like, these are I just went through these top three things, and these other ones are coming up. Like, is this, what you expect me to be working on? Is there anything missing here? You know what I mean? Like, is there anything
Okay.
that we're not talking about? Right. So ask really direct questions that sometimes people just are not that direct, right? Like,
Yeah.
are there any gaps in, what you see happening in the next couple weeks that you'd want me to focus on? Right.
Yeah, people don't want to ask that because I think sometimes they don't want more work. We don't want more work. So we just want to, we deliver. It's probably subconsciously because obviously that's actually going to contribute to a negative outcome next week. But I think in the moment, there's a tendency to want to keep things sort of light and positive and forward moving. And those questions can feel the opposite of that. I
That's
wonder if that maybe is why we don't do it.
That's probably a good thought. And like I think maybe then the next question should be like, oh, okay, well, I'll put that up the list. So I'm going to then deprioritize this other thing. You know what I mean?
Mm, right.
Like I think then it's just like, or just let me take that away. Maybe you don't know what to say because you get shocked. You're like, oh my God, like they wanted that to happen. Like I'm already have a whole other plan. So just be like, you know what? Okay, let me just take this away, relook at this, and I'll reshuffle some stuff to make sure that happens. And then you have
Hmm.
another opportunity to talk about it again, saying like, okay, this thing is now, number one priority. These three things will continue, but it'll be this sequence. Let me know if you have any.
Mm, yeah,
So
that's
written
awesome.
is good too. I think written is dying. You know what I mean? Like people don't write down things as much anymore. And when it's everything is verbal and everyone's in different virtual chats, a lot
Hmm.
can be lost. Or if you're in 50 Slacks, right? Like having that central, like, money page of like, what are we working on? What is the goal? Keeping everybody
Hmm.
grounded, just one document, or just
Yeah.
some, thing where you talk every week, like a stand up on Mondays or whatever. Like there needs to be a point as well. Like if you want to keep people aligned and, not frustrated or confused, then again, this is about putting a lot of time into that, right? In those communications.
Yeah, you really helped me last year when we were talking, and you suggested we implement sort of rituals, and so it reminds me of what you're talking about. And so we were having a hard time um, keep keeping the communication flow open around goals and our objectives and our OKRs. And so one of the things that you had suggested we implement is some more rituals around this, as opposed to just leaving it to the end of the quarter or at worst case the end of the year and then looking back and seeing failure. And
Yeah.
so one of the things we did is we implemented bi-weekly stand-ups with everybody, representation from every single team. And we just, in 30 minutes, we go through every single project and initiative and the high level targets. And we just look at what's behind, what's doing well, and we just communicate. And there's no problem solving in that meeting. It's just a touch base. And then problem solving would happen later. But everyone is then on the same page. And it's so useful. And I think of another one. We're in the middle of designing several new program areas. And so we have started to do the same thing where, you know, how there's always this debate between whether to meet or not to meet. Too many meetings, not enough meetings.
For sure.
And I think we were moving into the space of people were feeling like there was too many meetings. Um, but maybe they weren't the right meetings. So, but it made me shy to make meetings. I was worried about it because I was worried I was draining the resources of our staff. But I think we've come to this place where we realize we have to get together and talk. There are times, especially when you're designing something new, where you've got to be in the same room. So around those, the project team works every day on it. And every month we get the kind of sponsors, stakeholders around the table, and we all talk. Sometimes it's a bit of an emergent agenda, which can also feel kind of nerve wracking, I think, sometimes for people, but it's actually incredibly useful. So there's something about that, especially in this virtual space, not being afraid to sit around the table and have a 30-minute meeting. I
Yeah.
don't know. Do you run into that where people are feeling, Zoom fatigue, meeting doubt?
Oh, for sure.
Maybe they're not having enough FaceTime.
Oh yeah, and I think that they probably try to do what you're doing. Like, man, like should I be adding any more meetings, right? Or maybe
Mm,
there's like a mandate in the organization saying like we should only have meetings if we have to, right? So there's something good about that, like trying to say like, okay, like let's not have too many meetings. But on the other side, you get people like retreating, right? And then they stop
yeah,
talking, and then you end up with like lots of disconnect, right? So it's about figuring out like what is the work that needs to be done, and therefore what are the rituals needed to support that. So like some
mm,
teams might need to like come and collaborate like all week long, like a product team or something, right? Like they would need like lots of discussion back and forth and like working together. So you could expect them to have tons of time talking and collaborating in whichever way, whether that's meeting or tools or in-person offsite, whatever. And then, other people might be like, I don't know, customer service where they just have like service level agreements where they need to do things in a certain amount of time and have certain level of outcomes. So then in those cases, like maybe they just want to work independently and you can just measure them by their outcomes. So they could just work by themselves, but then they want to have motivation and, kind of excitement about what they're doing too. So then your meetings become about that, kind of reviewing what are the big stats and like what's the exciting piece about this. Like look at everything you guys done. You've been working really hard one by one dealing with all the customers, but when you step back, like wow, you guys, like we have amazing like customer results and like we got all these things done. You're amazing.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like, and like, or
yeah,
what are your ideas too? Like when people work in those jobs too, like what big opportunities to bring people together to talk about like what can we improve? Like they're in it all day long. They're the front line. And that's the people that can really change the trajectory of the business because they know where the rubber hits the road, like what is going well
yeah.
and where they know exactly when the noise starts, right?
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's right. I think that's fascinating and something that I think about a lot in my work. And I think we hear a lot from founders is just try it. Because I think people get scared to implement something, even a repeating meeting, or maybe it's a project or initiative, maybe it's a company. Um, but I'm often trying to encourage our teams to just try it. It doesn't have to be forever. It could be just for we could have one and it's a failure and we don't need this and great we exit from the rest of the year. I think that ability to have beginner's mind and be open to, I guess, open and curious and just try it. And that doesn't mean anything is set in stone. It's hard to find, and maybe it's hard to stay in as a leader in that mentality.
I actually like that mentality, and I think it's really gotten grasped no matter what type of business you work in is the whole idea of piloting something. But I
Yeah.
like even just simplify it to try it. If you just but you need to tell people you're trying it. So if you're gonna
Yes.
try it, but tell them you're trying as well. So be like, "Hey, you know
Yeah.
what? I think we're gonna try this out. We're gonna see if this works. We hear you. This is what people have said. We're gonna try this. We're gonna check back in a month." And that
Hmm.
is so much more forgiving than, "Hey guys, we're gonna roll out this new thing." Then that
Yeah.
gets tweaked on and it's a whole different feeling than like, "Hey, we're gonna try this out and like let's see what happens." You know what I mean? And then
Hmm.
it's a bit less committal, but you're still moving forward and executing on it.
Yeah. It doesn't work with everything, but some things you can remember that there can be a lightness to them.
Yeah.
So, working with leaders, we often hear and feel sort of that loneliness that leaders often feel at the top. I often say it's windy at the top. There's a lot going on. It's busy, and yet you often have the least amount of support. Um,
It's true.
what what in your experience are ways that founders can kind of cultivate strong relationships for themselves and their teams, perhaps inside and outside of the organization?
Mhm. It's a good discussion point because it is lonely, right? And like a lot of times I'll meet with someone like today I met with someone I haven't talked to in a while and I maybe had like a certain agenda for this meeting and the entire meeting, the entire hour was a download. They have no one else to
Wow.
talk to. Like, who are the
Yeah.
so things start happening, right? You have new people entering your organization. You have different things going on. Like if you're working either like any senior level role, whether you're CEO or head of HR, like there's so much discretion in that, right? Because you want to be thinking about things, but you can't openly think with the whole company necessarily on every
Hmm.
topic, right? So then there's a lot of that pressure and also the time they're getting spun around with so many deliverables, right? Like this is what I'm seeing out there, like all of that. And I think you need to keep that time sacred of like how do you decompress and who do you speak with, And obviously, I work in the coaching space, and I think that coaching is important and it's helpful because today,
Hmm.
like if you think about like in the yesteryears, I'll say like when I started working, it used to be the era of leadership programs, and I was so lucky. Like I was in all these leadership programs. I was one at 3M. I was in like another one at GE. I was in another one at Manulife. So basically, these programs, the way they work, they were like 2 years or 3 years to the next level in leadership, or like Manulife. I was 3 to 5 years to GM. This type of program. So you rotate to different areas in the business. You have mentors built in. You go to all these different courses, you learn best practices about leading, and your leaders did too. So, like, this
Hmm.
is like leadership utopia, right? You're learning so many things. You have people who care. They're like, there's a lot of process around like giving feedback, figuring out how to maneuver, bouncing back from feedback, all of that stuff, right? Getting racked and stacked in the programs too, moving through all of these things. So you learn so many things and you're kind of like always on the radar. So, like, you
Hmm.
compare that to today, like, I think it's something like 70% of leaders don't think that they're equipped to be leaders, like, just any level
Hmm.
of leadership, right? So,
Wow.
because these programs don't exist. So then what exists? Like, there's a lot of online learning, you could go and, watch LinkedIn independently, which they have lots of great content, or Coursera, or like whatever, there's like micro learnings that are really great. Like I work a lot with Elevate Academy. Those guys are excellent. This is just in time, no longer than 10-minute videos when you want to know like how to deal with a difficult situation or how to give feedback. Like this, I think is like more of what we need now. Like if you want to be a leader and get help just in time, Elevate, like I'm propping them up here, but like honestly, they're amazing for something like that I would highly recommend. But then like there's a lot of one-on-one need because a lot of times, especially in smaller business environments, people have kind of accelerated from being super individual contributors. So they kept on moving up the ranks. Like a lot of us, you're an excellent worker, excellent outcomes, great attitude, boom, next level, more work. Keep on going. Eventually, you get up into the VPs and C suites, but you don't have the gymnastics and like knowing how to think through different decisions, right? Or like or how do you manage different people scenarios? So
Hmm.
a lot of that is pretty lonely too. And you're like, how do I make a good decision here? And I want to be known as a servant leader, or help people with these different things that I'm passionate about, or I want to be someone who just gets stuff done. And how do you get stuff done? Right. So I think having someone to talk to and having individual coaching, actually really makes sense. My advice on coaching though is that you get like either one coach to coach everyone, like, if you're smaller, all the leadership team. So it's very consistent and you can control the dialogue and like have that coach support your values, etc. Where I think people over index on this is they'll get big coaching companies and get like, 50 some odd leaders in their company, 20 different coaches. What happens is those coaches coach them to quit because they are not aligned to your values, right? They're just talking to you about whatever you want to talk about. And a lot of times the people on your team are going to be like, this is so hard. And this is, like this, and this is like that. And the coaches will agree with you and be like, is this the right spot for you? And I'm like, whoa. So you need to make sure, like when you get coaches in there, like, yes, they're very helpful, but you want coaches that coach for performance, coaches that are very clearly vetted and close to the leadership, dream, of what you want people to do, recognize and advance in the organization. So those are some thoughts about, just helping people get support and think through things.
Wow, interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that before. People who have a coach, regardless of how good the coach is, progress faster in their career at that time than without one. And I can only imagine that's because of sort of those moments of self-reflection. And also where you don't often do that, you're just running from thing to thing.
Yes.
Or it's easy to avoid self-reflection. And then the other one is emotional kind of intelligence. And that's the other thing that it occurs to me when you end up in the executive team quickly. Maybe you've progressed quickly in your career and you don't have that emotional intelligence that then impacts the entire organization. Every little thing you say, every expression on your face, every reaction you have ripples throughout the organization in a way that it doesn't when you're an individual contributor or frontline worker or entry level staff. So yeah, I think for that reason too, for me, coaching has been incredibly useful just to be able to vet and talk through and deal with some of the emotions that just happen in life and work.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to think about is like, we need to be a little bit more forgiving, of like founders and leaders, because
Mm-hmm.
I see them out there. I've been in different organizations and also supporting lots of different organizations. Founders can be anyone, right? Like, but it could be your first time being a leader, And I think about when my first time being a leader, all the dumb things I would do. Right? You learn something, you feel like, oh, that didn't go well, and your leader would help you think it through, and you kind of you would learn, right? And then you go next time, try to do better, and whatever, right? And then you could tell, founders or whoever, like, hey, like, you might want to think about this or that, but they also need to live through
Yeah.
these things. But it's hard to live through that in front of
Yeah.
everyone. And then you get crucified, right? Like then people are, out on Glassdoor and like commenting on everything. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
assume positive intent. This person is just trying their best, right? They
Mm-hmm.
happen to be in a leadership position, a founder position, right? And like, did that go over well? No, but you've had lots of things that didn't go over well too. You just didn't do it in front of every single person in the organization, right? And then get criticized to death. So, and I've seen it so many times where people love to pick things apart. And, I've been there where you've had town halls, and I used to just be like, you know what? Bring your questions to me. I want to talk to you about them, see what questions you have. And generally people just like to just, pick things apart. There's nothing progressive about that commentary. So I don't know.
Mm.
People are listening, like
Is that
just
the
be
difference?
kind.
There's sort of venting and complaining. I've heard of that as someone talked about the difference. So venting is when you just need to kind of let it out to somebody. Complaining is when there's nothing useful about the conversation at all. It's just a backwards looking rant about picking things apart, perhaps. I don't know. I think sometimes we need to talk about the negative, but maybe it's how. And what does it mean? Does it mean, therefore, this is not the organization for me? Does it mean, therefore, that person is a bad person? Or does it just mean maybe we need to have a conversation?
Yeah, I think maybe that they are venting. They're trying to participate somehow, right? And
Hmm.
and a lot of it's like work maturity, right? Like, is this the right time for you to give this type of comment? Was that a
Hmm.
prime time comment? If you have one comment that the whole company is going to hear, is that the comment you want to choose? Maybe, maybe not, right? Like, is
Hmm.
this the right forum for that type of discussion, right? And what are you trying to solve with that comment? Sometimes they just haven't had the practice either, right? So they're just trying to participate and say things like, again,
Hmm.
positive intent, like that's what just someone's trying to do. But then on the other side, it's just like, wait a minute, like, why did you say that? And like, that's like,
Hmm.
look at it from the other side. This is just a person,
Hmm.
trying
Oh,
to
I
do.
love that. What am I trying to accomplish with this comment? Am I
Yeah.
trying to look like I know what I'm talking about? Am I trying to draw attention to myself? Am I trying to protect my ego? Like, what are the real reasons I'm making this comment?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or,
that's
a
fantastic
or am I
advice.
making this comment only because I can do it like an internet troll? Because this is what happens. A lot of people
Mm,
will just make the comment because they can. They can just comment, right?
right.
And maybe this is kind of like the times are changing, right? But like maybe there's just more coaching required to be like that's not an appropriate comment. Like there's not too many leaders, I don't think, today that make the time to circle back on a comment that was made in a town hall that was inappropriate. Not even it
Hmm.
wasn't so much like horribly inappropriate, but just not it's not ideal. You know what I mean? Or
Hmm.
something that they can do better. You know what I mean? Something like
Hmm.
that. So
Yeah.
then they just keep on doing it because no one's ever told them.
Yeah. Susie, the last thing I want to ask you about is what would you say to the career advice that some people get, which is find your passion?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, it's actually it would be different, right? If you ask different people. And for myself, like my career has really been varied, truly a generalist, right? It's like, and I get
Mm,
asked this all the time, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I'd always be like, I don't know. Like, I just want to keep on progressing
same.
and I want to, keep on doing different things.
Mm,
So I would say like that's a big question to be asked. What is your passion? I think what you should do is just enjoy the job that you're in until you get your
mm,
next one, right? So like I started off saying like my first job was in, customer service with 3M. And I always say like I'm happy I took that job because you know what? Now, million years later, right? Like I've been in different executive roles, I help other people think through things, do a lot of strategic work. I know what it's like to be on the front line. I've been there. I've sat in that seat. I've sat with really tough customers. I've taken on extra books of business, and manage those and try to influence those discussions, and like also been able to analyze the stuff that came through and saw where I could add value or where other people did, right, and where I didn't, and like all of the gymnastics of that. So, and when I was in that job, like I thought my job was really important, right? And if you don't think your job's important, no one else will. So I'd say like
mm,
as you're looking for your passion, like don't make it so heavy. You know what I mean? Maybe just think you're on a journey. You're gonna figure it out.
mm,
But like right now, you're never gonna get this time back. You'll never be this old, ever again. You'll never be able to be doing exactly what you're doing at this juncture. So it's a
mm,
gift, right? Like whatever it is, like you choose your
mm,
attitude. So
mhm,
you choose your attitude and you learn. Like it's amazing. Like every single thing I ever
mhm,
did, like an auditor, I've done every job that everyone hates. Customer service, audit, project management. Like those are like your classic throw people in a closet and lock it, right? Like I've done all,
yeah.
all of those. And you know what? Like it's all different, really good perspectives. And like I only got to
Mm,
do those for the time that I got to do them, right? So if you
mhm,
race to the top, you don't have enough depth of experience in all these different things. So don't think you need to go so fast because once you're up there, there's the expectation that you would know all these things. So it takes
mm,
time to actually do the reps, and during those reps, whether you're learning whatever ops or HR, finance, or whatever it might be, you're going to also learn management reps,
mm,
influence
yeah,
reps, getting stuff done,
yeah,
global stuff, like whatever it is that comes with your job. So think about a criteria that you just want for each job, and then you
mm,
will keep on working towards your passion because you're you, you know?
yeah. And maybe you can find passion and have a different definition of passion. I think the idea that your passion is a thing that then will result in a job is a really strange thing. I think for me, I'm very similar. I think for some people it's true, but I think for a lot of people, your passion emerges as you move through life, and different passions emerge on different days. Sometimes it's this thing, sometimes it's a person, sometimes it's a specific project. So yeah, I think of it like that as well. I think it's a really stressful thing to tell young people to find their passion and go with it. I think people say that in hindsight because they can see that they found passion along the way. But I don't think a lot of people graduate from university knowing exactly what their passion is that they want to do for the rest of their lives.
That's true. And I think what I learned graduating university and different jobs is that every job's important, right? Like you need everyone
Mhm.
to do all different jobs for the world to go round and round. So whatever one you're in, you know what I mean? Just like honestly, just enjoy the ride and learn something,
Yeah.
and appreciate those people. Like my kids, I have, tween type of age two boys. And a lot of people are like, oh, like, what do you want to help them get summer jobs doing this or that? And I'm like, I would love for them to work at McDonald's. This is my goal
Mhm.
because they're going to learn how to deal with the general public, right? They're going to learn how
Yeah.
to, make cash. They're going to learn customer complaints. They're going to learn to hustle, right? You're going to
Hmm.
learn so many great things in that type of environment. Like, and
Yeah.
all of us eat. All of us have went to a restaurant, whether it's fast food or not, right? Like, isn't that a great life experience? Like, and that will
Hmm.
contribute to your passion, just
Yeah.
that interaction. So,
You have such a positive way of looking at things, Susie, and such like a forward momentum way of looking at things. No wonder people want your coaching capabilities. You're just awesome. You're a great person to have um, in one's corner. And thank you for your insights today. I think they're really useful. And we'll link to a lot of the things that you talked about, including your business. And I think it's really fascinating. We didn't really get to it, but it's fascinating kind of the way you even started your own consulting company in one trajectory, and then it's kind of morphed even over the last 2 years. And we're coming up on your 2 year anniversary, which is exciting. And we'll be able to promote that. It's probably similar to when the podcast will come out, actually,
yeah.
similar timing. So,
No, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Like, whatever, I'm team Gina all day long and Venture Canada, like, let's go. And I'm very pro Canada. Like, let's go, let's be competitive.
mm,
And you have the joy of working with like this young talent that's just getting started, that's dreaming, like, please, someone work on like fire suppressants. There's got to be innovation out there. Like, we're burning down the whole world. Like, I hope that we're like have a stream of work in that space, or just any of the spaces. There's so like biotech, like there's so many we all talk about,
yeah,
but all of
there's
this
tons
work,
of opportunity.
smart people starting businesses, like, go for it. Like, we can do it all here. We
Yeah.
have everything we need and more. So much.
Mm,
So,
yeah, exactly. It's great momentum, great energy. Thanks for being here, Susie.
all right. All right. Thanks for having me. Bye, Gina.
Thanks for listening to this episode of A New Wave of Entrepreneurship. Stay connected with us via our socials and through our email list. And be sure to subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss our next episode. Have feedback on today's episode? Let us know directly in the app. Thanks again for listening and for joining the new wave of entrepreneurs. Till next time.